you, this is actually a trend. I have had more people do their first Substack live with me than anybody else. And see how it says connecting up there, up in the top right hand corner? It always takes a while.
Mm,
And so I did it with, I did Mark Elias's first one and Katie Court's
nice.
first one. And everybody always says, oh my God, what if nobody shows up? What if nobody comes to hear us talk?
Well,
And
we're
then
live.
inevitably nice people, like the people that we see in the bottom, all start flooding in. Um, so let's give them a little bit of time to populate. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Cynthia. It's fun to see you guys. I can never keep up. Once it starts going, it's too
Okay,
fast.
it's like a waterfall. Look at that.
Isn't it
Yeah.
crazy?
Joyce was just telling us how she joined a lot of other really a lot cooler and more important people than us for their first Substack live. So we are honored to be amongst that
I'm a
crowd.
push back and say that there are a few things in life that are more important than fair fight, which I think our listeners probably know, right? Was started by Stacey Abrams, was incredibly important in Georgia delivering two Democratic senators to the United States Senate, which may, not for nothing, have been an election that saved the country. Um, has us holding on by a thread right now. But the work Fair Fight does to protect the election will be incredibly important in 2026, working across the Deep South, sharing its advice in other parts of the country. I'm so glad you guys are on Substack.
We're so thrilled to be here. We really wanted to launch this at this time. There's rising threats to democracy. There's a lot of disinformation and skewed algorithms. There's instability with Twitter. I refuse to call it X. There's
Me
volatility
too.
with
I'm
TikTok.
glad.
You're in good company. I'm glad.
Yeah.
And then, Meta has stopped fact checking. Mark Zuckerberg is kind of like showing a little bit that might be cozying up to the Trump regime. So, Substack is a place for clarity, for depth and action, and that's why we're here. We want to help folks get the right information so they can take action to help protect voting rights ahead of 2026 and 2028, just like you mentioned.
Well, that sounds like you guys are going to be busy. Tell me more, because I talked a
Always.
little bit with Lauren Grow-Wargo, your president, about how this is going to work. But what are y'all going to do? What's your intention for the Substack space?
Yeah. So essentially, we're going to do two weekly posts about hot button issues, or maybe something that was in the news a couple weeks ago that hasn't gotten enough coverage recently that we think we're going to provide, in-depth analysis, and some actionable ways to make an impact on those issues. Then we're going to have some guest columns, guest features from civil rights leaders, elected officials, organizers, folks
Do
that
I get
are.
to write a guest column?
We would love it. We would love if you
Cool.
would write a guest column for us.
Cool.
And then every Friday, we actually put out a mini news roundup about some of the worst attacks on democracy happening around the country that we call Bad News Weekly. And it's really just a way for us who care about American democracy and freedom to keep tabs on what the other side is doing, those that want to weaken and destroy it.
So, for everybody who's just joining, it's the Rights and Insights Substack from Fair Fight, the Georgia Voting Rights Organization, that you guys can now subscribe to and learn about voting rights as we head into the midterms straight in your own inbox.
Yes, and we're here with Joyce Vance to kick off our first inaugural live. I'm Max Blugrath. I'm the communications director for Fair Fight, and my colleague Amir can introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Amr Badat. I am the Southern States Director and Senior Advisor at Fair Fight. Really excited to be here with all 800 plus of you and
Wow.
Joyce and Max. This is going to be an awesome conversation. We're really looking forward to using this space to connect more directly with our supporters and all of our colleagues in the fight for democracy, not only in Georgia, but across the entire country. And we're talking about a really important topic for today's conversation, which I'll turn it over to Max to talk a little bit more about, and love to have everyone participate in the conversation too.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say Rights and Insights is a free Substack, and we plan to keep it that way as long as we run it. So, please subscribe. It's free. And, today, Joyce, you wrote a really interesting piece. I think it was either yesterday or the day before, but it was about, a new memo from the DOJ that talks about stripping away people's citizenship. I'd love to hear a little bit about, your research on that, your take on that, and, what it could mean for democracy and, beyond going forward.
Yeah. So let me tell you how this came about because it's interesting. This news about denaturalization, stripping away citizenship from people who are naturalized Americans, came up in this very innocuous Justice Department memo. It's dated June 11 and it's titled Civil Division Priorities. The Civil Division is the division in main justice in Washington that mostly defends the United States when it gets sued. And so the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division, not the Civil Rights Division, but the Civil Division, issues this memo. This is very common, right? You're a new leader, you issue a memo to the troops saying, these are our priorities, this is what we're going to do. And so Brett makes this not very surprising statement that we're going to align with the President of the United States priorities, right? Because that's now we there's a distinction here on individual cases, especially criminal prosecutions. DOJ should not talk to the White House. Those should be in-house decisions based on the law and the facts. When it comes to policy, that's a different question. Presidents get to set policy. Barack Obama, criminal justice reform was a big policy. I did a lot of work on helping people re-entering their communities after serving a prison sentence, and that was a White House led priority. So again, nothing horrible here, right? The memo just says the Attorney General has said we will align with the president's priorities. Okay, so far so good. It's a 4-page memo. The last page and a half is devoted to denaturalization, something that is legally available and very rarely used. It has overtones from the McCarthy era, where Joe McCarthy, the senator who went after quote unquote communists, they used denaturalization on a lot of people. And of course, that was rank politics, right? It was never about people were communists who were going to take down the United States. It was just about
Mm,
finding a tool that you could use against your political enemies. And
mm.
so something like 11 people a year on average have been denaturalized since the 1990s. I bet the cases people will remember are Nazis who came to the United States after World War II and lied about their participation in the Holocaust. And when that comes to light, they're prosecuted, they're convicted, they are stripped of their citizenship. Even in those cases, I can recall seeing people concerned, why are we stripping this 89-year-old guy of his citizenship? What good does it do? But it's a legally available mechanism. So here's the problem, and I apologize for the long explanation, but I think it's important to
No, we're
put
here
these
for it.
things in context so you get what's normal and what's objectionable. Here's the objectionable part. They list 10 different criteria for people to be denaturalized, and they say it's a priority. This is something we're going to do all the time now. And they tell the US attorneys, go forth and denaturalize people because the statute gives the authority to US attorneys. So instead of a carefully thought out sort of penalty reserved for the worst of the worst, now US attorneys are being called upon to outperform each other, right? Oh, you're the US attorney in North Alabama. You want to denaturalize more people than your colleague in Georgia, which is just batshit crazy. Um, but the criteria, some of them comply with the statute, right? People who lied in the process of obtaining their American citizenship. So let's say that you're just a sweet young girl who's looking to come to the United States, but you lie and you say you qualify for a genius visa because you speak 5 languages and you're doing all this stupendous research. Well,
Who
those
could
are the
that be a
kind of
reference to?
lies. Those are the kind of lies that could be used theoretically to strip you of your citizenship. It's sort of crazy, right? That's a very harsh penalty. We might prosecute those people. There are certainly consequences in the criminal justice system that all Americans face for fraud, but it's a little bit weird that it would strip you of your citizenship. Then you get to the bottom of the memo, and the 10th category says, and any other cases that, for whatever reason, the civil division thinks are priorities that should be pursued for denaturalization. And
That's right.
immediately the list is going through my head. Journalists who write stories that you don't like, professors who teach curricula that you don't like, the
Students who protest,
possibilities, you bet, the
students who
possibilities
write
for
op-eds.
abuse are endless. And look, let's just be upfront and say this. I mean, I try to never descend into conspiracy theories, and I think we all need to resist that. The problem with this administration is it's not where it starts, it's where it ends up. And it's a hop, skip, and a jump from denaturalizing people as a punishment to deciding you can do it to American citizens. And I saw some folks on Twitter saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That's crazy sauce. That's not how this works." And that's right. That's not how it works now. But with this administration, where it starts is not where it ends.
Think you make a
Joyce?
really good point because like we can't assume there will be anything that's business as usual, right? They've ignored the law, they've tried to deny due process, they are trying to curtail the power of the judicial branch, they're taking the power of the legislative branch. A lot of people think these things can't happen here, this idea of like American exceptionalism, but we've seen across history, but even in modern times across the world, these things happen in democratic societies where they slide into soft fascism and potentially full blown authoritarianism.
Yeah, one thing, Joyce, that you mentioned in your post was you drew the comparison to 1930s Germany and how the Hitler regime was using denaturalization against German Jewish people and essentially categorizing them as the other. And we all know what happened there. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of historical analogies there and how serious of a threat you think this is?
Yeah, I mean, so a different legal construct in Germany, but Hitler was no great respecter of the law. And after he came to power, he began stripping out legal protections that people had. And this happened sort of as a series of steps, stripping German Jews and other undesirables of their citizenship, and also, not coincidentally, of their property, right? When you lost your citizenship, they took your property. Oftentimes, your spouse and your kids were included in these efforts, and they did two things. They took citizenship away from Jews who were in Germany, but if you had fled the country to keep your family from being killed or tortured or detained, they also stripped you of your citizenship, saying that you weren't sufficiently loyal because you had left the country. And so therein you can see where people might get ideas from and think about how they could use that here. And the real problem is we're now living in the post CASA era. CASA is the case that the Supreme Court decided Friday that says that lawyers can no longer seek temporary injunctions, nationwide injunctions designed to keep the administration from putting policies that violate the law into effect. With these nationwide injunctions, there was a pause button that could be pressed so that the courts could test whether what the administration wanted to do was legal. That doesn't exist now. And so let's say the administration decides to suddenly strip citizenship of, just pick one of their favorite targets, journalists. If you were naturalized as a kid before you were adopted, you guys all have lost your citizenship and we're going to deport you. And of course, there's due process and legal proceedings that would have to go along with all of that. And we're also used to saying, oh, they can't do that because of due process. But we've seen that these are not people who respect due process. There's now a whistleblower complaint issued by a former DOJ employee who says that he sat in meetings where the PAYDEG, that's the number two guy in the deputy attorney general's office, said, F the government. If a judge issues an order stopping the planes, we need to make sure the planes take off. The time to keep the Trump administration from putting this into effect is now. The only guardrail left that can do that efficiently is the people. I think when American people went out and protested holding signs that said due process, that shocked even this administration. And I think we need to stay the course with that.
I think you make such a strong point here. Especially with the check being we the people. I think if you look at Trump's wins in 2016 and 2024, a lot of it was a response to like an anti-institutional backlash. There's a lot of mix of other factors in there, of course, but the institutions were not doing well, and now they're going to do even worse. And there's no automatic system of checks and balances, right? This all comes down to people and the decisions made by people. And now Trump is stacking those positions with loyalists who are showing they'll just disregard the law. So the people are the ultimate check here. It's a pretty scary time.
One thing that I think is really important to note, and Joyce, you mentioned the Casa case. It's such a crazy decision for so many reasons. One is, and just this is the background of the case. The Trump regime issued an executive order that is essentially in violation of the Constitution. It's trying to change the Constitution by executive order, which is a dramatic step in and of itself. And then
Like, can
when
we just call it what it is? I know I need to stop swearing, but it is also batshit crazy.
We are
crazy.
You, a
very
president
pro
can't just.
swearing here at Rights and Insights.
Is this a safe space? I mean, I don't usually do it because my kids watch me, but I just can't express enough outrage. Presidents don't get to rewrite the Constitution. No, 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 no. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I mean, I appreciate the emphasis on that point because I think it's so important. And it also highlights how batshit the Supreme Court's decision is here. Because essentially, what the Supreme Court is saying is that in this extreme situation where the president is doing something that's so clearly unconstitutional, courts don't have the power to stop it across the entire country. And what the other point that I think is important here is, and it goes to the point that both of you have made now about the power of the people and the power of the people to stop this, is that not only is the court showing incredible disdain for the rule of law, but the court is showing incredible disdain for lower courts, right? The authority of lower courts to actually implement the rule of law and to uphold the Constitution. And the court is saying, actually, no, lower courts, you don't have the authority to block clearly unconstitutional acts, and only we have the authority. That this is what Kavanaugh said in his concurrence. Essentially, only we have the authority to do something like that. So it's really a consolidation of power in so many different ways. And you know the context that we're seeing this all happen in is an attack on immigrants, an attack on immigrant rights. And this is something that we obviously saw starting with Trump's 2016 campaign
The
for
moment
president.
he came down the escalator,
The
Amir.
moment he came down the escalator, it began then, and it has been a through line for his first presidency into now his second presidency. And I think what we're seeing this happen in the context of birthright citizenship, in the context of this denaturalization order, in the context of attacks on voting rights. And it's so important for us to remember that even though these are being framed as attacks on immigration or attacks on immigrants, these are acts that are going to impact all of us across the entire country. These are attacks on all of our rights, on our democratic pillars and institutions, and we need to treat them as such and not just an attack on one particular community that we have in the country.
Yeah, I mean, what I really want to say here is shame on us if we let Donald Trump make immigrants the other, because we are all immigrants. I am the grandchild of Russian Jewish immigrants, who fled to this country and
Same.
found a safe haven. And the part of the reason I do the work that I do is because I can hear my granddad's voice in my head, and I know he would be proud and happy that I'm doing it because he loved this country so much. And we just have genetic memory in our family of how much that generation loved and treasured this country. But you make, I think, a really important point for people who maybe are inclined to view immigrants as not people, not human beings. I live in Alabama, you live in Mississippi. We know a lot of people who are very anti immigrant. And so, what I try to say to them, and I think this is a powerful explanation we can all use, is whether or not you agree, that people who are here without legal immigration status deserve rights, you're protecting your own due process by protecting them. And what I mean is this: if I get arrested for bank robbery, I get a lot of due process. I get a lawyer for free, I get a criminal trial, I have an appellate process. When we talk about people in immigration status, they get much narrower due process. They're
Mhm.
entitled to notice and a hearing. That means notice that they're going to be deported or have other action taken against them, and they have an opportunity to tell a judge, not a months long trial, but just usually a 5-minute hearing with no lawyer provided for them before the government deports them. And what that does is it's a fail safe against mistakes. It's a way of making sure that an American citizen is not inadvertently picked up in a deportation sweep. We've seen that happen repeatedly. Someone with a withholding order, an order from an immigration judge that says they can't be deported to a certain country, extraneous circumstances, a kid having cancer treatment. We want to have that due process in place because none of us are safe if it's not. And if you think that your, blue eyes and your blonde hair protect you, where they start is not where they end up. We need to keep due process in place for everyone. Use that argument with your Republican friends.
I want to follow up on that for a minute because this is they've made it very much about immigrants, but if you take a step back, it's really about power, right? They're really what they're really trying to do is create a permission structure through messaging, through rhetoric, um, that drives hate, drives fear against immigrants, tries to convey the fact that they are not people, so they shouldn't be entitled to due process. And they want us to accept these things because if we accept the military being sent to Los Angeles, if we accept no due process for immigrants, and U.S. citizens being deported at a moment's notice, what else will we accept? How far can they go? um, and they're also doing this in the voting rights space, as Amir mentioned earlier, with things like the SAVE Act, with Trump's executive order on elections. Marjorie Taylor Greene just announced she's going to file a new bill to try and do a new census that's U.S. citizens only, and then they want to redraw every congressional seat in the country. Joyce and Amir, y'all are the attorneys on here. You know very well that goes directly in the face of the 14th Amendment. They don't care about the
Hey, if
Constitution. They
Donald Trump
just
can
want power.
rewrite the Constitution, why can't Marge?
Exactly. So I urge folks to see this for what it is. Take a step back, look at the words they're using. They keep using words like invasion, criminals. They want us to see them as dangerous people. And even in court, Trump appointed judges and other Republican appointed judges have knocked down and rejected this use of the word invasion. And that was in context of like invoking the Alien Enemies Act and other things, but still it really undercuts their rhetoric. There is no invasion. So why do we have to accept this gross abuse of power?
Yeah, and I think what we need to do, we've talked about a lot of the attacks that we're experiencing right now on our rights, on our foundational institutions. Uh, but I want people to know they have power. We still have the power to block and stop all of this terrible stuff that's happening. We have power to advocate our members of Congress to vote no on things like the SAVE Act, which would make registering to vote incredibly difficult for up to 70 million people across the country. We have the power to advocate our members of the legislature at the state level to institute protections for us at the state level, which are incredibly important. And so, Joyce, would love to hear a little bit from you about other things that people can do to act, because I think we can see we have 2,000 people joined here today because
Wow.
they care about what's going on in this country, and people are hungry to learn about how they can make a difference.
I had not looked up. That's amazing. And all of you who've joined us a little bit late, I'm here with two guys from Fair Fight, and they're here announcing their new Substack, Rights and Insights. It's free. It's about voting rights. It's about democracy. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope y'all can't hear that. My dogs are playing upstairs, and it sounds like a herd of elephants galumphing up there. But you should sign up for the new Fair Fight Substack. This is the group started by Stacey Abrams in Georgia, one of my favorite places to get quality information about what's going on with voting rights and what we can do to make sure that elections are fair. I saw somebody in the comments say we need to give up on the myth of 2026. And I understand that people are worried about elections in 2026. I want to very gently push back on that sentiment and say, I don't believe Donald Trump is secure enough as an autocrat yet to get away with canceling the 2026 elections. Um, and ironically, Max knows this because I've complained incessantly during the process. I've just finished writing a book about how we keep democracy. And so I've been doing a lot of research about other countries in this area. And you see this notion of autocrats, of dictators who want to just cloak themselves in the legitimacy of democracy and the rule of law. So they hold elections, they just put their thumb on the scale really hard in their own favor. We see that in Hungary with Orban. Putin still holds elections in Russia,
Venezuela.
right? Exactly. Venezuela is a great example. I think Donald Trump will hold elections. The question is whether or not they will be free and fair. And here's what we have going for us as Americans: we don't hold a national election, We hold 50 elections in the 50 states, plus military and overseas and territories, and
And the
they are run.
Constitution demands it, right? States
They're
run the elections.
exactly, and they're run by local people, and so my box is actually a bad example. I vote in Birmingham, Alabama. We are very, very blue, but other boxes that are run by Republicans, when they're sitting there as volunteer election poll workers, they're not advocates for the Republican Party. They're advocates for American elections, and I think that there are good Americans across the country who will insist on free and fair elections. And if you want to do something that'll make a difference, sign up now to be a poll worker. It's one of the most important grassroots things that we can all do.
There's a great organization that can help you do that too. I believe it's powerthepolls.com or
Yeah, power the
powerthepolls.org.
polls.
One of those. You can find it.
Well, you guys, 2.2 people have shown up. I mean, that's utterly amazing. Let's talk a little bit more about practical steps that we can all take. I think in some ways this is a difficult moment. The news is incredibly overwhelming. I know I unplugged, we had two kids graduate in May. So
Mhm.
2 weeks where I stepped aside and played mom instead of journalist. And both times it was so difficult coming back because so much had happened in the
Mhm.
space of a week that catching up was nuts. And I think people feel very overwhelmed and inadequate to keep up with it. Um, One of the great ways we have of keeping up now is Substack, which is, I don't mean to be self serving here. I mean, I'm delighted to have any of y'all subscribe to my newsletter like Fair Fight. It's free. You can sign up as a paid tier too, which helps. But I'm delighted to have free subscribers, to have as many people as possible reading and thinking about these issues along with me. There are other great Substacks, a lot of people doing important writing that's either journalistic reporting or opinion or someplace in the middle. Legal specialists, doctors. I think right now it's incredibly important to stay up on what's happening in public health because measles is back in the United States. And I had a drink last night with a friend who's a doctor, a pediatrician, who mentioned that polio is suddenly showing back up again. So lots of stuff for us to stay informed on. I mean, what do you
A
guys
new
do?
meaning to MDMA there. Make diseases great again.
Great again, yeah. I mean, but
MDGA.
what do y'all do? You're a lot younger than I am. How do you stay on top of the news? What's the right way to process it?
I'm going to be a bad example here. I get a lot of my news from Twitter. I follow some key reporters. Some of them I know, and I have like alerts for them. So when they post something, I can glance at it. I can see if I want to read it. But lately, what I've done is I've tried to batch my news consumption. So throughout the day, I'll take a couple windows and I'll just take a scan at a couple news sites. I'll take a scan at Substack, see what's going on. I'm trying to be more mindful of my attention so I can stay focused on what I'm working on, but I can take a moment to divert and see what's happening, but not get pulled away like they want us to with their whole flood the zone with bullshit strategy.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm similar. I use Substack now a lot, and social media is a big source of news. Obviously, I try to fact check and everything because there's a lot of misinformation out there too. But
So much.
the other thing that I think is so important for people to remember, like if you're tuning in today, if you're subscribed to our Substack, if you're subscribed to Joyce's Substack, you are getting a decent dose of information about things that are going on in the world. But a lot of your friends, a lot of your family might not be. They might not be as engaged as you are. And an incredibly important way to make sure that people are engaged is just to share information that you're reading about, that you're learning. I know that, whenever I go to visit my family in other parts of Mississippi, whenever I go and talk to friends who are living elsewhere, like they love to hear about the things that I'm reading about and that I'm engaged with, and I love to hear about the things that they're reading about and engaged with. So like share the information that you're learning. I think it's really really important for us to engage as many people as possible, because when we think about things like the big ugly bill that Congress is trying to pass right now, I read a statistic that said about 50% of American voters don't know about the Medicaid cuts that are included in the bill, or the potential cuts to Medicare, or the
Yes.
cuts to
Because Medicaid has different names, right? It's not called
Yes.
Medicaid. So people that are
exactly.
getting Medicaid don't realize that Alabama Care is Medicaid.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just in Mississippi, which has a total of less than 3 million people, nearly 200,000 people are going to lose their health insurance,
Mm,
Oof.
right? And,
mm.
and the numbers are even starker in other places. And so we have to let people know that Congress and their elected officials are poised to do things like that, to literally take away your health insurance. And
And
one of the best ways is to share the information that you're learning.
on that point, posting about this is great, but the thing that really makes a difference is literally sending it to people, putting it in your family group chat, putting it in a couple of the group chats you got with your friends, DMing, some stuff on Instagram instead of some funny memes. Maybe just send some important information, once a day or something like that. That is the best way to bypass the algorithm and get it directly in front of people. And that's part of why Substack's so great. It has really like a minimal algorithm, so we're not held captive by the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks and folks like that.
I think that that's a really important point. And sorry about that. The university's testing its, I don't know if you could see that. The university was testing its, we have tornadoes down here. So they're testing the system. So it
Oh,
all of a sudden shows up, it overrides everything. But, something that I have read a lot about and I'm fascinated by is the science of how people learn and who they trust. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's people trust the people close to them, their family, their inner circle. And so you, every single one, all 2.4 thousand of y'all, you're the most trusted source of news for people that are close to you. And I saw a great, I don't know if it was a post someplace or a comic strip, but it was like, I'm dating a librarian and I can never win an argument with her because she always comes with cites, right? And I think that we do live in an environment that's full of disinformation and misinformation. And so it's important to say, let me tell you the facts about that. And let me tell you why I have confidence that those facts are true. And to put it out very much, in that manner. I was having a conversation with friends this morning, a bunch of whom lean conservative. And so I was explaining to them that my view on the moment that we're in is that it's not about party, that it's about democracy. And that I look forward to the days when I can argue policy again with my Republican friends, right? I miss having those political fights. We don't live in a moment where we have that luxury. If we don't all get together to save democracy, then we won't get to have those conversations down the road. That's something that we can impress upon the people closest to us. This is a moment to act in the country's best interests. We may not be fighting on the battlefields in Normandy. We may be fighting on Twitter of all the crazy places for democracy to be won or lost. But the reality is, we are in the fight of our lives for democracy, and we cannot pretend it's anything other than that.
I think that's a fantastic place to end and a really great button to put on this conversation. Um, and I just want to leave y'all with a couple of calls to action here. As we talked about, the big ugly bill, the big bullshit bill, whatever you want to call it, is in the House today. They're going to try to vote on it, move it forward, and then the Save Act is in the U.S. Senate. So call the congressional switchboard. We'll put the number in the description after this, but it's 202-224-3121. Call your senators, call your representative, tell them to vote no on the big ugly bill and on the SAFE Act.
That's a
Amir, you
great
have anything to
place to
add?
end.
No, that's perfect. Those are really, really important things that we need to let all of our congressional members know about, that we care about. Let them know that if they vote for these bills, they will suffer electoral consequences in 26, 28, whenever they're up for reelection. I think that's really important. Thanks for mentioning that, Max.
Hey, before
Absolutely.
y'all sign off, remember to subscribe to Fair Fight's new Substack, Rights and Insights. It's free, and you'll get to hear more of these two great guys.
Thanks so much for joining us, Joyce, for our first Substack Live. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. We really appreciate y'all, and we hope to see y'all again here soon. Take care.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, Joyce.